Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new appointment of the 40 Under 40 e-lecture series on combustion. Today, it's a pleasure to have with us Professor Corinna Schulze Netzer. She's an associate professor at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim. And after receiving her doctorate in 2019 from the Brandenburg University of Science and Technology, Professor Schulze Netzer started working at NTNU and was granted in 2023 a faculty position. She's developing and applying detailed chemistry models for emission formation in reactive multiphase flows of alternative and renewable fuels, with a particular interest in carbon-free fuels and solid waste valorization. In 2023, she also received a Young Talent Grant for groundbreaking research from the Norwegian Research Council to work on thermal plastic recycling. Corinna, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for having accepted our invitation, and I will leave you the virtual floor for your webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this nice introduction and for inviting me here to this webinar. I selected today a topic that is specifically for waste application, and I titled it Emission and Speciation Modeling in Waste. To X applications, and the X here stands for energy, but also for waste valorization. And also in this webinar series, we have seen some people working on plastic recycling, for example, and then the X can stand for new products as well. Yeah, as an overview, the context that we're working in here is that in the EU, we have quite ambitious targets to increase the recycling of municipal solid waste up to 65% by 2030. Also, we want to recycle all of the packaging, or 75% of the packaging waste. We're quite good with paper, for example, already, but in plastic packaging, we are at very low recycling rates. In the EU, we're around at 20% at the moment, and we want to increase that to 75% by 2030. And then the third aim is also to reduce landfill to a maximum of 10% of the municipal solid waste. And we have countries like Germany, Austria, also here in Norway, where we incinerate already a lot. But then there are other countries in Europe that have to increase these rates. And in this, I'll come back to that at the very end of this lecture to show you the potential of potentially waste to energy applications in Europe. And this is just another way of showing where we want to go. So this is the waste hierarchy that we have in the European Union and also in the EEA countries, the associated. So these regulations are also true for Norway. And of course, the first way is that we want to prevent waste. We want to reuse more waste in the future. Then we want to recycle materials. We want to energy recover more. And then we want to have a least amount of landfill. And with our technologies that we're working here in combustion, so I mean waste incineration, but also gasification and pyrolysis technologies or torrefication, we can help by moving up some of the mass flow from disposal, so having less waste or than the ashes from the waste incineration that go to disposal. But we can also move now with our new technologies that we're researching on as plastic chemical recycling or other valorization of waste, and help moving what we do now for energy recovery up to the recycling step that has a higher priority and is more important also towards going circular economy. Yeah, one last overview of these aims and the circular economy that we go through in the EU. This is from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's quite a famous picture of the circular economy. We have different streams here. So we have, let me switch on my laser pointer. So we have, the typical flow. We mine resources. We have the products, us as consumers, and then in the future we need to increase the stock and recycling of the mined materials, but also of bioresources. And I have marked here all the processes that I can see ourselves as the combustion community to be important to work on. Of course, it's energy recovery, directly burning waste and waste incineration plants, but also we can be part or are part of the extraction of bioresources and biogas usage, but then also we can be, now with the new trends in chemical recycling for plastic, for example, be part of the recycling chain. And these are all the fields that I'm also working in and that I base examples of in this presentation. When I'm talking about feedstocks and plastic waste feedstocks in my context, I'm talking about a very classical municipal solid waste or industrial waste. We can see here, we can talk about wood that is somehow treated and has some chemical pollution, so we can't use it in a direct biological cycle. Nowadays, we also look more and more into sewage sludge. This has different reasons. We find more microplastic, for example, in sewage sludge. We also find more hormones or residues from pharmaceuticals, which question now if we can directly bring it out to the fields as we used to, or if it's better to treat this first chemically, get rid of pollutions, and then use only the nutritious part to go back to the agriculture. Then, yeah, there's a refuse-derived fuel. This is basically a form of a municipal solid waste. It gets selected specific materials. For example, paper or plastics are combined and then put in this more convenient form. And then this can be used in any kind of process of firings. It can be used in the cement industry, for example, or other high temperature applications in industry. And then we have plastic waste, and we're talking here about the ones that are not recyclable. So everything that goes through classical mechanical recycling should go through there. But we're talking here about food packaging, for example, that consists of different layers and of different polymers in one packaging. And these are really difficult to recycle mechanically. So here we have a huge potential to do that chemically, thermochemically, and yeah, then there are many more of these feedstocks, all the waste feedstocks that you can think of. There are different concepts and methods that I want to talk today about, and this is based on how we have our workflow here. So there are, as we saw on the previous slide, many feedstocks, and in this type of modeling, when we need to know even the higher heating value is different for all of these. The carbon content is different, the nitrogen content, the sulfur content, and all of these are going to be important. On the one hand side, to know how much energy will be released, and on the other side, how much pollutions we have to expect. So feedstock characterization is a very important part of the concept, and I'm going to talk first about this. And then we have the different applications, and once we have defined a feedstock in a way that we can use it in our numerical methods here, we can then go for waste to energy application, pyrolysis gasification for energy applications. So here we go for syngas that is supposed to be burned, or we can go also for pyrolysis and gasification for material recovery. Here we have different targets then as in the second step. And the methods that I'm going to introduce today for this is the feedstock characterization. We do that through a surrogate formulation and the use of detailed chemistry. And all of these applications, the multi-phase flow character of this, we calculate here or model here using a stochastic reactor model concept. And then for the gas phase, depending on the application, we also use CFD. Sorry. This was not meant to be like that. And then ultimate goal of these kind of simulations, once we have done that, is we on one hand side want to deliver input for process modeling for our colleagues here from the process engineering department, and also provide input for sustainability analysis. And this goes to industrial ecology applications and life cycle analysis. For waste to energy application, important is of course the emission formation. Here we have NOx, SOx, but also quite amount of HCl. So this comes from the chlorine in the feedstock and many more. For example, dioxins are very important to consider since they're very heavily toxic. And then what is coming more and more important here is also to understand how much of the CO2 is from a fossil source, since in waste to energy applications we have wood, paper, food waste, but then we have also plastics, rubber, and other. And the taxation and the authorities are now having an eye on that, and we need to know how much of the CO2 is indeed from fossil resources, and we have to pay taxes for those. But for bio-originated CO2, this is not. We don't have to pay extra taxes for these. Then there is the pyrolysis and gasification application. Here we're looking forward to estimate the cold gas efficiencies, heating values of the gases. We try to estimate the need for cleaning for the next steps in the processes. And we, in energy applications, it's also interesting to know what are the emissions then in the energy supply stage if we have this two-step process. And then the last application for the material recovery, here we're looking specifically for product gas speciation. Of course, also the need for cleaning. We need to know how much impurities are there. And then depending on how the upgrading looks like, it might need to be that we need to optimize now for a different species pool than we are used to in classical gasification and pyrolysis application, where we go for high cold gas efficiencies. I want to start now with the surrogate formulation and detailed chemistry. All right, so somehow all right, slides are fine. So this is the overall concept of the model. We start with a surrogate formulation, and then we couple a detailed chemistry model. And the idea here of this model is that we really start from the feedstock and then have a continuous description through the chemistry until we are in the gas phase. So we start with the volatilization reactions, have heterogeneous reactions in the model. Once the species are in gas phase, we have small gas phase species, but also tar species, so larger hydrocarbons. Here we have, for example, also hydrocarbons with nitrogen included, and those then continuously break down depending on our system. And this is important for waste to X applications because we have emissions that are fuel borne. So fuel NOx is very well known in the combustion community, but then we have also sulfur, chlorine, and other, basically all the elements that you can imagine are also present in waste. And then we have in the combustion models or in all the combustion application also airborne or combustion-borne species. If you want to keep the example of the nitrogen chemistry, so we have fuel NOx that comes from fuel species, and then of course we have the thermal NOx that we're all very aware of in combustion application. The key of all of this model is that we describe the feedstock sensitive to what we really feed in. And what I mean with sensitive is we look into typical distributions. Here, this is for municipal solid waste, and we look into different samples that we can see. And there we see there's a certain spread in nitrogen. There's a certain spread in heating value, sulfur, and chlorine. And with our model, we try to replicate these. And then ultimately, when we apply the model, we can go for extreme cases. We can say, what is the maximum of nitrogen that we can have in our feedstock? What is the consequence emission-wise for that? What is the minimum? And the same for other applications. So how do we formulate, or why do we use a surrogate concept? The idea is that we want to quantify the impact of the fuel variations of these daily or hour by hour varying fuels. And we're looking here for the average, but also for minimum and maximum concentration of certain elements to, specifically in the regard to look into emissions. We want to optimize the process and feedstock. So we think here about feedstock engineering, for example. So if you have a sewage sludge that has very high moisture contents, is there something available close by, maybe from agriculture, that we could mix and make the fuel more ideal for our processes? And then we want to deliver the data for system analysis. And how do we do that? We use different chemical and numerical representations. So the best well-known surrogate in combustion community is the octane number from the fuel. When we go to the gasoline station, there we tank an octane 90 fuel, and this is basically nothing else than a number that tells us that the real gasoline behaves like this specific mixture of 90% isoctane and 10% N-heptane. And this same concept we use here, just that we don't use N-heptane and isoctane, but we use biomass species like cellulose, hemicellulose or different plastic species to emulate or represent our feedstock in a good way. And we try here to find the key characteristics and also target the emission precursors like fuel NOx precursors. So these are our species pool in blue in the top that we're using. We have classical biomass species, cellulose, hemicellulose, different lignins, proteins, and those we have all borrowed from Politecnico di Milano, from all of these nice biomass schemes. There are many different versions of the woody biomass. We use a rather old one now here from 2011, and then there are updates and also expansions to algae biomass, for example, where we took some of the reactions from. Then there are product species that we that represent products from reactions with inorganics. This means we are not carrying through all of the possible inorganics, but we say from these reactions they can originate some more ammonia into the gas mixture. There's some CO2 and there's some sulfur species resulting from these species. And then we have a set of plastic species, which are the most common one found in waste. And then there's a lipid species that is organic fat. Then we have these apparent global step reactions for the solid. So on the very left, the bold one is the original surrogate species, and then depending on the species or the mechanism, and they are decomposed in the solid phase. So cellulose activated here is still like a solid. Char is a solid, and then everything that is marked green is the gas phase. There are different gas species and different tar species. And here, for example, for the proteins, here we see that we release also tar species that include a nitrogen. It's going to be important then for the NOx calculation and others. These green marked species, they are the transition to the gas phase scheme, which comes on this slide. So we have after this, it's 44 reactions in the solid phase. We have 188 gas phase species and around 3,000 reactions. And in these, just some highlights of this gas phase chemistry. I didn't put all of the reactions here. We have the largest hydrocarbon that we have is C11. This is also originated from some mechanisms from the Politecnico di Milano. Then we have nitrogen-containing species. Here we have included pyrrole and pyridine from this reference here from Alzueta and Wu et al. From different publications. And then we have in the emission models a nitrogen chemistry that it comes from Peter Glauberg's group, and also the sulfur chemistry comes from the Danish group. This is all compiled into one reaction scheme, and then we can go through our applications. To match the combination of the surrogate species to our feedstock, we need to formulate the surrogate somehow. This is an example that we have done for sewage sludge, but for the others, this works very similar. So first, we decide on different species or categories that we want to include. So here for sewage sludge, we took all of the bio-originated species that we have, different proteins, the lignocellulosic species, and inorganics, and then of course ash and moisture. And we do, let's say, a very easy trick here. We just do a linear least square fit to the ultimate component analysis that you usually get, you can do in the lab, or you find it in literature for your specific feedstock. This tells you the exact number of carbon, hydrogen, and other elements that you want. Then we have some additional conditions, and these are the specific ratios that we know already to be between cellulose and hemicellulose or different lignines. So these are ratios that we set by manually. And then once we have composed the surrogate against the dry ash-free composition of the data, then we mix in ash and moisture linearly in the amount that we need. And here in the bottom, you see an example for that. So sludge is the experiment from the ultimate component analysis, and then the surrogate composition, where we match closely carbon and hydrogen, but also nitrogen and sulfur. And ash is just adopted as it is, so this will always match well in this approach. The next step is then to test the composition in a TGA environment. This is done here using the stochastic reactor model that I will introduce a bit later on. And here are some examples for different feedstocks that we modeled. We have textiles, which is this in the top here, which is mainly cellulose. Then we have here a mixture of municipal solid waste and paper sludge. So the first one here, this is only municipal solid waste, and the bottom one is only paper sludge. And then we have a mixture of both, and we see that we keep all of the trends here very well. Then we have here another mixture of municipal solid waste and oil seed shells, which is like from the same publication, these two. And then here's, for example, one of the plastic species. This is a polyamide, also known as nylon. So this is the chemical model. Now let's move to the stochastic reactor model and the CFD simulation, how we use these to model the applications. So what is a stochastic reactor? Most of us use a homogeneous reactor. These are like the ideal reactors, quite standard in chemical industry and in combustion modeling, where we have usually one pressure, one temperature, and get a certain composition out. Then the stochastic reactor was developed initially for engine applications, where we have a very highly turbulent flow, and we have regions where we have rich combustion and lean combustion, specifically if you think about direct injection systems. And there it was shown that it's really good to use these stochastic reactors. The stochastic reactor, we have a 0D environment, but we divide the volume into certain fractions. You can imagine it like a CFD simulation, but the subparticles, they don't have any volume, so they just are a vector of species, and those can then, depending on a mixing model, be mixed. And as a result, they will create a probability density function of temperatures and of species in this domain. And now for the multi-phase flow, we have expanded this model. All these models are embedded in the code from Logisoft, a company that I worked for, and we still nicely collaborate up to today. And that is then here the stochastic multi-phase reactor that we have developed over the time. And in these, now we have divide these particles that we call stochastic particles. They're not particles yet, so these are vectors with species in, and these vectors we have divided into pore gas species, into bulk gas species, and in solid. And now in the reaction solver, from the solid species, the gases go first to pore gas, and then there are models to have a species transport from pore gas to bulk gas. I will show another figure in a second. And this model now enables us not only to have a species distribution and a temperature distribution in the bulk gas around, but also over different solids and over the pore gas trapped in the solid. And this is always very nice to use compared to homogeneous reactors. If we have systems with strong inhomogeneity, if we have incomplete mixed inflows, and if you want to know how are the species formed based on local conditions, that might be very different over the computational domain that we're running. So this is a zoom into the model, how you can imagine it. And this is all 0D, so but still we have given it a certain dimensionality back to it. So this dashed part here, this is supposed to be the solid. And from here, we start with the surface chemistry solver, and the volatilization reactions are solved. Then once we have species in the gas phase, we have the heterogeneous solver that can handle gas phase reactions with the surface of the solid. Once we have released the species, as I said, they first go to the pore gas, and then between pore and bulk gas, we have heat transport and mass transport. And these are, for example, Nusselt laws. And then we have also radiation included, and there can come heat in from the reactor wall or from other particles. Yeah, this part is all like the surface chemistry. This is the devolatilization, the green palette that I had on previous slides. And then here we go to the gas phase chemistry, and this is then important for the species breakdown and for emission formation. Now, to model these different applications, we can run this stochastic reactor in different modes. Mostly I'm using two different modes. One is the plug flow reactor configuration, where we start at one reactor and at the inlet, and then look into a disk how it changes over time. These are the particles that each have a solid, pore, and bulk gas composition, and depending on the mixing time that we define and the mixing model, they can exchange species. And this mixing time and mixing model is one of the crucial input parameters of the model. The others are, of course, we have to make sure that we have the right amount of oxygen, for example, the temperatures have to be right, and then we're looking also into the residence time. The other configuration that we can use this model is the reactor network. Here we have the reactors divided into several units, and each of these units can have different inlets and outlets. And in this configuration, where I should put them into a series, this is very useful to calculate the grade fire in a waste incineration plant. And this is, in some slides, going to be the first application example for this. Yeah, we have applied this for different types of validation experiments, but also industrial size configurations. So we use that to calculate classical TGA experiments. We can use that for entrainment flow reactors, rotary kilns, grate-fired furnaces, as I said, and it's going to be the next example, but also for fluidized bed reactors. And this is what I'm going to end this presentation with and what we're working on these days. So let me start with this waste to energy application. Here we're going for looking specifically for emission formation and the differentiation between biogenic CO2 and fossil CO2. Yeah, I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the waste to energy plant, so that's why I have one overview how the process works. Here on the left, we start by delivering the waste to a plant. Then this is the core here that comes after. This is the grate-fired furnace usually. So there are other types of incinerator, but the grate-fired furnaces are the most common one, where we have the fuel on the grate and air that goes through. I'm going to explain this a bit more in detail on the right-hand side in a few seconds. Then the hot air or the flue gases goes up, heats up some water or other fluid in the Rankine cycle that then generates the heat into electricity or provides some heat for district heating, for example. And then a major part of the plant is the flue gas cleaning, which is quite extensive because we have all these different elements in. And then after the flue gas cleaning system, we go out of the flue gases to the atmosphere. Ashes are, of course, collected, and this is then this part that we have to still landfill. So we start with a rather large volume of waste. We use the energy, and then we condense down the mass to the ashes. That is then much less volume to landfill. On the right-hand side, as I said, we have a bit zoom in into one of these incineration chambers and into the conditions. This is a standard scenario. So we have here's certain biomass, but for waste it works the same way. So we have a biomass of waste that is sent on the grate. In the first zone, it is dried, and then we undergo thermochemical conversion first what we need to notice is here, this part in the grade, we run this typical fuel rich. So we run at 0.8 or 0.9. We drive out first very light or very fast species to sorry, that's a difficult word. We drive out species like moisture, so water that goes out first, light hydrocarbons. Ammonia is usually one of the very early released species, but also chlorine species and sulfur species that are important then for corrosion later on. As we move on, we start to have the incineration. So here we have typically the flame around here, and then there's this region where we have the char burning region where really the carbon is driven out of the solid, and then we have the ash formation zone in the end. And then typically we have here at the top a zone where we provide so-called secondary air. So this is extra oxygen to fully burn out the system. And the strategy of running fuel rich first over the grade and then very lean in this secondary zone is a good strategy to mitigate NOx emission. And this is like in modern system, we have sometimes several steps of fuel and air. And this is then a fuel staging or a staging concept to control emission and burnout. What we do in our model, we cut the fuel bed from the freeboard, everything of the gas phases, and first calculate what's happening in the fuel bed. And this is what we do. And this is one example how we do it using these stochastic reactors. This is an experiment or a full plant scale experiment from literature. This is one of the fuel beds, and you see it's around 12 meter long and around 9 meter wide. And we divided this bed in 3 rows according to the air feeders in this system. And we run for each of these rows, one simulation. And after that, we can divide these simulations and redistribute them to the network, to the grade. I will show in a second how we do that. Most importantly to recognize here is that for these rows, even though this is one big grade, that you can see that these over the different processes of the bed, we will have conditions that lead to a faster burnout. This is all here defined by a short fire scenario, and we can have conditions in the bed that happen so that the fuel takes a bit longer to be fully burnt out, and these are then the long fire conditions. We can see here a validation of these simulations. So here we feed in the solid feedstock, we run through, and as the bed goes into this direction, this is the fuel bed length here on these simulations. We have here the temperatures, the symbols are the experiments, and the lines are the different rows, and we see an average as well for the experiment. And we see small differences between these reactors in the temperature. We see differences in how fast the oxygen is consumed for the different rows. This comes from the stochastic. So even though we start with the similar input at the initial rows here of the reactors, we end up with slightly different variations over the bed. We see that this is also presented here in the CO prediction and in CO2. Yeah, for CO here, we were always a bit too high compared to the experiment. So of course there can be one reason that there's something that we have to look into in our reaction scheme, but then the other hand is we have these really big facilities where we have 12 meter long beds, 9 meter wide, and usually the measurement is done with probes that are around 6 meter long. So these are really long sticks, and then they try to measure at a certain point. So we're not really sure where this measurement point was. We are releasing here the CO in our model directly of the fuel bed, and in the measurement equipment, the measurement could be really also like 30-40 centimeters above the bed. So these locations are not 100% certain, but in general, we can say that we have captured the conversion rather well. And then to use these results later on, we transfer them to a 2D setup. So we have these different rows that give us a temporal definition solution. And if we now give them a dimension back by putting them next to each other and assigning the reactors to different zones in the cell, on the grade, we can reproduce these and a two-dimensional field over the grade. Here we see the distribution within one reactor. We have different distributions in equivalence ratio and temperature, and each of these spots will have a certain emission or species concentration vector. And for each of the times that we're interested, we take those and we stochastically attribute them to a certain part. So the first, say 10 seconds, we assign to this first part of the reactor, and then we distribute this over 4 inlets and so on. And we do that for the second simulation and the third. And overall, we created here per stochastic reactor 40 squares that we attribute to one of the grades. And overall, this is like more than 200 inlets. And we get, what we can see is that here in this first phase, this is compared to other beds, also in the experiment, the fire that sits very up in front of the grate. Some others would sit a bit further in the middle here, but in this experiment, we see that the fire is very early. And we see that this is methane. Methane is directly released in the beginning of the bed. It gets up to a certain maximum and then it falls off. And here's then the char burnout. This is nicely captured by this method. And one of the next species I want to show is sulfur. Here we have also an experiment. This is how it looks in the experiment, how sulfur is released. Most of it in the beginning of the bed, and using our method, we can redistribute the results into this grade scenario and see that this makes sense, that we have most of the sulfur released in the first part of the bed and then none in the later on. To use these simulations further, we connect these to CFD. So now we can imagine we have these fields for all different emissions and for hydrocarbons, so for methane, tar species, C2H2, but then we have also HCl, different nitrogen species that we have all released over the bed. Here for NO, we can see that in the beginning, there's usually no NO released. And then once we have the combustion and higher temperatures in the bed, there is some NO formed. And this here is indeed some of thermal NO, fuel NO, would result from ammonia and HCN, for example, that is released here and then is later on formed in the gas phase. These boundary conditions we provide here as an input to the CFD model. This is quite large, so this is a 20-meter high furnace, which is 40-meter wide and then 9-meter long. And we use converged CFD for this simulation. And the result of these simulations you can see here. This is first the temperature field. Here we have the fuel species or the gas phase species have been provided here as an input. Then we see the combustion. Here we have a rich zone. The flame sits here in the center. And then here in the secondary air part, we have again flue gases and air that is blown in at lower temperatures. We see that it's a rather heterogeneous here in the bottom, and then with the secondary air coming in and mixing out these gases, we get a more homogeneous field in this. Here's the lambda, so the air-fuel ratio. We see we have very rich conditions here, and then as the secondary air comes in, we're getting leaner and leaner. As I said, this is we'll target here emission from predictions. So I have prepared here some slides how we can follow up with NOx. We start here at the grade with these figures, and then we have plane 2 and 3 as we move on to up in the freeboard. From our stochastic reactor model input, we have this very heterogeneous conditions. We have different equivalence ratios over the whole grade. We have different temperatures, and we have regions where we have a lot of ammonia. So this is ammonia, HCN, and NO, and the color is the total fixed nitrogen in the system. So we have here most of the nitrogen being bonded as ammonia that we feed into the system. Then as we move up here to in the freeboard, we see that this is changing. So ammonia gets consumed. We know that ammonia can create fuel NOx, but also that we have the thermal denox effect, so that ammonia can be part of the NOx reduction mechanism. And here we see both that ammonia is reduced, and that overall the total fixed nitrogen is reduced, and some HCN is created over the freeboard. These comes also from larger tar species that break down to HCN. And we see that in general, the conditions change from a very heterogeneous system to coming to a more homogeneous system, going down to smaller range of temperatures and to a smaller range of equivalence ratio. Then as we move further up in the plant to plane 4, 5, and to the outlet, we see that this is wider spread. And then at one point, all of the nitrogen species are consumed, and all that remains are NOx species. So we have a full burnout, and we go further down in the heterogeneity in the system also. So in this, with this method, since we have so many species, we can also follow up other species like corrosive species that we are very interested in, since they damage the plant. So we want to try to have nice mitigation technologies for these, or at least know where they accumulate. I'm not showing these results because we have more to go. So the next concept that I want to talk about are pyrolysis and gasification. And this is here for energy applications. So here we had to look into cold gas efficiencies, and we wanted to understand what is the need for cleaning or potential emissions in the second stage. The system that we looked into here is sewage sludge treatment. So first of all, we wanted to know what are the compositions, what is the variation of sewage sludge that goes into this stock, what is the thermal conversion, which species can we generate, and then in the second stage, if we use these gases to produce heat or electricity, what emissions are we to expect. And here we investigated the combustion in mild combustion, because we have a rather low calorific gas. So the technical equipment that we are calculating here is a rotary kiln gasifier. We took again the results, the experiments from literature, and we represent this here in this plug flow configuration of our model. In this study, we created different surrogates based on different experimental sewage lab samples. In total, we created 18 different samples. And what you can see here in gray, for example, this is the ash content, which will right between them. Then we have in the more red-orange colors, these are classical biomass species, so cellulose, hemicellulose. These can originate, for example, from paper in the system. And then we have proteins and others that are there in different combinations. All of these feedstocks, we created a surrogate, and then we fed them into our system. And now we see that there's, this is supposed to be on the next slide, but what we see here is like the results of these simulations. So we create different maps. And on these maps, for example, we have here the different sewage sludge samples on one hand and different moisture contents on the bottom. We run these through our system, and then we can see, based on different inputs, what is the difference in composition. So here, this is methane. We have some that create more methane, and we see that if we dry the system or the feedstock first, we were going to have more methane, for example, and we're going to have more CO. While the wetter the whole system gets, we have seen that we create more CO2 in the stock For hydrogen, we see that there seems to be an optimum in the middle. So for around 30% of moisture, we provide some steam to the gas phase, and this additional water leads here to a higher hydrogen yield in total. Here behind was supposed to be the lower heating value, which depends, of course, on these species. And then there's also the cold gas efficiency as part of that. For species modeling, we look also into the emission precursors here. We have done here another sorting than you saw before. Here we sorted after the sulfur content, and we see, not surprisingly, that the more sulfur we have in the system, the more SO2, H2S, and COS we will have in the final product gases. So there's a rather linear correlation. And then we have done the same for nitrogen. And here's also the more nitrogen we have in the fuel, the more we go to the gas phase. And in this gasification application, we have more ammonia and HCN, while NO is really almost not formed at all, or if then at higher moisture contents. From these simulations, we collected some of the squares in the full species vector of those, and went ahead to go for in flame simulations. I think these were run by one of my colleagues, and these are Cantera flames. And what we did is we used this complex distribution as the inlet, rerun in mild and classical combustion to compare these two systems. And then what we can see is that, of course, for mild, we receive lower emissions for NO, for example, and for SO2. This is what we expect. And we wanted to know what is the impact from the fuel description and the treatment of these detailed species. And what we have seen is that, for example, for NOx, due to the combustion regime here was superior than the fuel input, so independent of different nitrogen concentrations that we set into the feedstock, we had rather constant NOx emissions at the outlet after the mild regime, while, for example, for the sulfur species, where we don't have this very complex reduction and formation scheme, we see a strong dependency of the sulfur oxide emission in the combustion phase based on the solid feedstock. So the more sulfur we have in the feedstock, the more SOx we form in the combustion phase. Last example that I prepared is the pyrolysis and gasification for material recovery. Here again, we look for product gas speciation, and what is here more difficult than maybe for combustion application is that we stop earlier, right? So for incineration, when we find the right CO2 amount at the end, this means we only need to get the carbon balance correct. Well, here we stop in the middle, so it's a bit more challenging to really capture the tar species in the right amount and the right size at the right moment. Then we look for the need for cleaning, and we try to optimize our systems. The configuration and the reactor that we're using for it is shown on this slide. So we're going here now for a fluidized bed reactor, which has the fluidized bed here on the bottom and then a freeboard. And we model this with the two-stage system. So first we have one reactor that is for the system where we have the fuel bed. So we have the inert particles that form the fuel bed. We have the particles that are the waste or the biomass that is converted. And then once we have the burnout of the fuel particles, we go over to a pure gas phase solver where we have some of the ashes, but they are then not reactive anymore. And as you can see, compared to the three phases that we had before, we had bulk gas, pore gas, and the solid fuel. We have introduced now a fourth phase, or a second solid phase, which is the bed material. Some results for that, and yeah, I've marked it here. This is a work in progress. So this is what we're working on now. This is a gasification experiment, I believe from Spain, where they have these nice measurements of small hydrocarbons and tar species. And we have different operating conditions. We have slightly changing equivalence ratios. We have a change in the fluidized medium here, the steam, and an increased dilution. in the system. And what we can see here is that we captured the trends relatively good already. So the red one is methane, it's to be read on the right-hand side. Also C2H6, the blue one here is captured really nice. For the C3 to C5 species, we are a bit too high, so we're not broken down enough in our simulation yet. We have to see why that is. But then on the right-hand side, we have the major tar formed in this experiment, and this is benzene, so C6H6 in red, and a big one, naphthalene, C10H8, which we both capture rather nice in this experiment. Another example, this is also RDF, so mixture of biomass and plastic. And also this is still work in progress, and you'll see that not all of the results are there yet. If we look into hydrogen, methane, CO, and CO2 formation, and the difference between the cases is that the first two have a different feedstock than the second two. And then the last one is again a new feedstock, but compared to the others that have air gasification, this is an oxy-fuel gasification with oxygen and steam. Yeah, and you see we have in the simulation at the moment too much hydrogen. So I believe there's still a bit too much steam in our system. But yeah, what we can see here is like the idea of the model, and what we're aiming for is to predict then also the tracer species, which are HCl, H2S, and the nitrogen species. And we're not there on the magnitude, but we see that we already yet captured trend very well, and we're not too far off. So, but we try to improve that further. Yeah, let me sum that up. So we have seen that we use this combination of detailed chemistry and stochastic reactor model to model these applications. We have in the group also activities to model, to have proper particle models, as I would say, to have, for example, DAM models. But here we have the challenge that we can't, that this is very expensive already. And then if you include the detailed chemistry, this just blows up the simulation times, and we're trying to solve that in the future. So for now, we use the stochastic reactor model. And then once we have these results, we provide this as input for our colleagues from process modeling and sustainability analysis. I want to conclude with some trends and perspectives, and why I think this is an interesting field to keep working in. This is a very nice overview from where we see on the left-hand side the accumulation of waste in Europe. And then we see the density of population, the more waste we have. So we have a lot of waste here in Belgium and yeah, in West Germany, also in the north of Italy, where we here in Norway, we have such a low population that we don't have so much waste generated. And this is another type of challenge for us. We really need to think about how to do the logistics and the transport in an efficient way to have enough feedstock for these waste to energy applications. On the right-hand side, we see existing waste to energy plants and potential for new. So in blue, orange, and red, these are existing plants, and we have differentiation between some that produce only electricity, some that provide only heat. For example, here in Trondheim, this is where we sit. We have a waste incineration plant that provides heat to a district heating system. And this is heating a part of the university and part of the city, but it's also, for example, providing or used for some cooling applications. Then we have in green all of the potential plants. So here we see in East Europe a huge potential to generate more waste to energy or to implement more waste to energy, but also here in the UK and in Spain. And yeah, I think reaching our EU targets, we'll have to spread the waste to energy applications and target it to different areas. So where we have a lot of waste, big plants, but maybe also a solution here for us in Scandinavia are more decentralized, smaller gasification or pyrolysis units to convert the waste. Some other trends and perspectives that I want to highlight are other things that are happening in this field that I did not touch upon yet. So for example, there's a really nice, there are efforts in carbon capture and storage for waste application. I invite you to check out this interesting project that is a European consortium with some people here from Sinter, from Trondheim, but then there's also German universities, I think also Greek, and a really big network, and they investigate chemical looping applications for waste, so that we have flue gas stream from the waste conversion that consists mainly of water and CO2, which makes it really easy to capture CO2. Then, for example, here is also another consortium from Germany, Portugal, and other countries where they look into hydrogen production from waste. And then I did a quick scope research on what's going on in plastic, chemical plastic recycling, and checked out for plastic and pyrolysis, which increased interest, or gained interest over the last years already, and we see that a peak in publications, and now we see also slowly that the classification application for plastic also starts to gain some momentum, and we have more researchers looking into that. At the very end, I would like to make a note in my own interest. I'm currently looking for a PhD student. The application deadline is 27th of February. And if you're interested in working on chemical recycling for plastic and you want to do some molecular dynamic simulation, I'm happy to receive your application and to discuss it a bit further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Corinna, for this interesting talk. Very practical and practical problem and timely challenge, let's say. Okay, I will now open the Q&A sessions. If there are any questions from the audience, feel free to unmute yourself and ask Corinna. If
maybe I can start.
Okay, go ahead, Alessandro.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Corinna, for the very nice talk. As Sal was saying, that I agree, it's a very timely and important problem. I was wondering, because we have been looking in the past into the modeling of the volatilization and similar processes. How can you inject this notion, I mean, the information you get from the experiments on speciation, right? Can you use them at the level of modeling, I suppose, in order to inform your model about the initial devolatilization of the products into gaseous components?
The speciation measurement.
Yes.
All right. We have not done that. Yeah.
Okay.
I think our approach is, yes, we start with the ultimate component analysis, then we do the thermal conversion, then we check against the measurement if for the species that are available, if these are correct, and if yes, then we go forward, for example, in the waste incineration. Yeah.
Okay, so you do, okay, it's interesting. You do it in an iterative way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions from the audience? If not, I would like to ask if it's more a general question regarding this. It's a field with many uncertainties in the experiments, in the simulations. I was wondering if this, the quantity of interest for people from they do sustainable management, process, system analysis, industrial ecology. Are these uncertainties good enough? They can get, I mean, they can get ahead with it. They can get away with murder, or we need to find a way to minimize those uncertainties. They need us scientists, combustion scientists, to minimize this uncertainty and to use more sophisticated approaches for uncertainty quantification to minimize those uncertainties.
Yeah, I think that's an important question. Yeah, so as you raised, specifically in these waste applications, there are a lot of uncertainties. And what we try to do is try to come up at least with maximum and minimum values, what to expect. And then, but then what we see when we talk to our colleagues here from industrial ecology, usually they are interested in one number. So we have to find ways in condensing it down and making it even more representative. So we were trying to expand to have more informations, while they even asked us to narrow it down again. So that was interesting and is a new challenge. But yeah, I think so far this worked rather well, because like this transfer of data, so I have colleagues that took over this now for process upgrading of the models, and we do a similar approach for engine emissions, for example. So, and the transfer works rather well, and the degree of level of the numbers are good enough, let's say like that. So they are happy to take them. Yeah.
Okay, that was what if this number, if my guess, if I look for a number, I will look for the mode of the distribution, the most probable one. But if I don't define the distribution well enough, that might be not a good number. That's what I'm thinking about. But also, the distribution that you use in the stochastic reactors are taken from. How do you come up with those? What do you suppose? It's taken from experiments or from other sources?
Yeah, so the distribution and the reactive in this model that we have, the distribution is calculated within the model. So we start with homogeneous conditions, and then we provide them. And then as the temperature gradients are different, as we heat up the system, we have, for example, particles that exchange heat with the wall. And these are going to be hotter than others, and this creates a certain inhomogeneity in the system. And as we move ahead in the simulation, these inhomogeneities grow. And ultimately, at the end, we have a nice probability density function that is not imposed at all. It's really like gathered from the process.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Well, doesn't seem so. So yeah, I would like I would like to close this Q&A session now, and thank again Corinna for the talk.
Thanks,
for having
Corinna.
accepted our invitation. And I wish you everyone a nice weekend, and see you soon for the next appointment of this lecture series. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.